The Bionis has revived, and the threat of the Telethia envelops the world. This is a record of an untold story, one that will decide not only the future of Shulk and his companions, but also the fate of Fiora, who has been stripped of Manus Minato. The world of the Bionis, a land that stretches across the body of an enormous god. Situated on its right calf is Colony 9, a settlement for the dwindling members of the Hom's race. It's said that there once existed about 10 colonies in all, most of which were destroyed by Mechon attacks. Colony 9 had endured thus far because of its fortuitous distance from the Mechonis. Although falling, detached bits of the Bionis' body posed an occasional threat from above, there was no question that this colony was a precious, peaceful haven for the Homs. For Reyn, Dunban, Fiora, and Shulk, this was their one and only home. Hey Shulk, got a minute? Dean, a researcher at least 10 years older than Shulk, called out to him inside the weapon development laboratory. He had come to Shulk long ago for help too, hoping Shulk could act as a matchmaker between himself and a widow he had fancied. It seemed Dean hadn't changed a bit during Shulk's long absence, however.
I don't know much about this sort of thing either, actually.
Dean continued to speak, unaware of Shulk's inner feelings. But, because Dean was his senior, and because he needed help, Shulk couldn't rudely turn him away. Instead, he answered as always.
That doesn't sound good.
Dean's request turned out to be a simple enough task, compared to being sent into monster-filled caves or being sent up and down the Bionis countless times. His trivial little errand was nothing at all.
I'm glad everything worked out,
Shulk said. Dean nodded at this with a beaming smile. Despite his poor sense of humor, he was a good-natured person deep down. Shulk climbed the staircase in the lab and stepped into the military district outside. Evening enveloped the sky. Shulk hadn't been able to finish his research today either. Not necessarily because of Dean, though. His goal was basically a wild goose chase to begin with.
I'm certain what Lenarda said is correct, but...
Drearily, Shulk crossed the military district. The streets filled with day workers heading home while self-defense force soldiers took up their positions for night duty. As he watched people come and go, Shulk was suddenly overcome by a feeling of déjà vu. There was a time when the people were at constant war with the Mechon. Colony 9 was nothing more than a rearward base at the time, however. Most of the fighting against the cold, metallic invaders from the Mechonis took place on the Sword Plains. There were occasional rumors of stray Mechon wandering into Gour Plain, but not even those posed any concern for the colony itself. Those peaceful days wouldn't last forever, though. That day, swarms of Mechon launched an assault on Colony 9 from their new intermediate base in Colony 6. The sudden raid shattered the peace that had lasted a little over a year. It also marked the beginning of Shulk and his friends' journey. Now, Colony 9 was prepared for battle against the Telethia, creatures that could soar freely through the air and strike from anywhere. They existed solely to reap the life from all living things on the Bionis. There was no escape from them. The people toiled day and night to fortify their defenses against the Telethia. Yet, somehow, regular, everyday life had returned to the town. It wasn't the exact same peacefulness as before, but the seething anger that had filled the air immediately after the Mechon invasion was nowhere to be felt now.
Everyone's grown so strong. Even this town has.
Yes, even the town. Just as a person can toughen his or her mind and body, so too can a town grow stalwart. The people of Colony 9 had gained the strength to live their everyday lives while remaining ever vigilant. Shulk breathed an inner sigh of relief. He and his companions would soon have to head into the Bionis' interior to do battle with a god. A final battle from which there was no turning back. Before doing so, though, they decided to tend to unfinished business to ensure they would have no lingering regrets. The party's journey had yielded many findings, including some that the Weapon Development Laboratory could utilize. Putting this information to good use was one of Shulk's unfinished tasks. The Mechona, natives of the Mechonis, used their technology to create a replica Monado for him. If more could be made, the Homs could gain an extraordinary fighting edge. Dean, both surprised and ecstatic, began to examine the data Shulk provided.
Metalware had always been his area of expertise, not cabbage rolls.
Shulk also had one other goal, a glimmer of hope that the Mechona Dr. Lenata had given him. No matter how slim the chances were, this was something he was absolutely determined to do. But, unlike with the replica Monado task, this was something he hadn't told anyone else about. Shulk left the military district, crossed the central plaza, and made his way to the residential district. He greeted the artist Kenny Rohan as he passed by, but was ignored. Sesame was finally awake, but seemingly not awake enough to recognize Shulk. After making his way past shops that had just opened for the night, Shulk finally reached the city's entrance. There stood Dunban and Fiora's house. Dunban had chosen this location so that he could rush to the scene of an emergency faster than anyone else, should disaster strike. Shulk opened the door he had passed through countless times since he was a child and entered the home. Fiora's home-cooked food was amazingly good. The camp food she made during the journey was tasty too, of course. But finally being home again with her familiar spices and ingredients seemed to help her unleash her full potential. Shulk, who had arrived late, was thoroughly enjoying the food. Fiora was delighted to see this as she prepared more to eat. Visitors were once common to Dunban's home. Besides Fiora's childhood friends Shulk and Reyn, Dunban's war buddies Mumcart and Dixon were also regular visitors, as were Colonel Vangear and Lieutenant Colonel Cans of the Self-Defense Force. But after the Battle of Sword Valley, the only people who ever came to see Dunban were Gedwell visitors. Much time had passed since then, however. The old war buddies who'd once sat at the dining room table were now replaced by Charla, Ricky, and Melia. The sight of the lively dinner gathering warmed Shulk and Dunban's hearts. At least until the food on the table ran out.
Hey, Pops! That was my food!
Reyn eat plenty already. Ricky deserved to eat for working hard all day.
I'm the one who did the work. All you did was spew poison and fire from behind.
It burn up lots of calories. Ricky need to refill or else dizzy.
Ricky said, stuffing his mouth with energy aubergine. Dunban was dumbfounded.
How on Bionis can you fit all that food in such a tiny body?
Reyn and Ricky began chasing each other around. Charla could only shrug her shoulders.
Honestly now, it looks like you both could use a cool down.
Melia calmly made her way to the kitchen.
I don't mean to rush you, but we ought to serve the next dish now. This commotion around the dinner table is unbearable.
Melia said as she picked up a serving dish.
Wait, that stew is for you, Melia.
Fiora said without turning around.
I'll serve Reyn and Ricky's in a minute.
She continued, while stirring a pot.
I've already had my fill. You needn't put me ahead of the others.
Oh no, that's not it. I set some aside just for you, before I added Reyn's favourite spicy cabbage.
Indeed, Melia wasn't very fond of spicy cabbage, but her way of life had never allowed her to be fussy about food. She had been taught from a young age that it would be shameful for a member of the imperial family to be picky about food, especially food offered by the citizens. Reyn had once shared some spicy cabbage with her on Gower Plain, and she courteously ate it all. Reyn had meant no ill will by it, of course. She knew he was simply being friendly, although she did feel a tinge of murderous rage when he gave her a second helping with a big smile.
Was that a bit presumptuous of me?
Fiora timidly asked.
No, not at all. Thank you.
You've really loosened up, I must say. It's nice. You're much more open and candid now.
Melia wasn't sure how to respond to this casual remark. She wasn't necessarily offended, but having been raised by the less direct Hyentia, she was still unaccustomed to this sort of language. That said, however, Melia admired Fiora's ability to openly express her emotions, both pleasant and unpleasant alike. Lately, Melia even found herself thinking,
I wish I could be like her. I wonder if I ever can.
Okay, big eaters. Here's some more food to tuck in too. This has tasty sausage and Pyronhack's belly meat, so it should be very filling.
Reyn and Ricky's eyes immediately lit up.
For real?
Oh, Ricky love Fiora. Ricky let rub later.
Apparently, the two could be friends, as long as there was plenty of food left to eat. Reyn poured some stew into Ricky's plate. The two began to eat side by side.
You ought to eat up too, Melia, before it gets cold.
Oh, yes.
Melia picked up her plate and sat at the table. She took a spoonful and brought it to her mouth.
It's delicious.
Without the spicy cabbage, the stew was light in flavor and perfectly suited for her high Entia palate. This was the first meal in a long time that Melia genuinely, truly enjoyed. She savored the flavors as she took another spoonful. That night, Melia was awakened from her light sleep by a muffled, anguished cry. Melia sat up in her bed and looked out the window. Ether light twinkled in the darkness of night, indicating that daybreak was still far off. Makeshift beds had been set up for Melia and Charlotte in Fiora's old room, on the first floor of Dunban's home. Fiora, of course, slept in her own bed that had always been there. Charlotte was snoring heartily in the next bed. As expected, Fiora was the one in pain. Melia stood up and went over to her.
She's enduring another painful night.
Truthfully, Fiora's moaning had woken Melia up several nights in a row. But there was nothing Melia could do for her. She wasn't sweating in her sleep, nor did she have a fever. In fact, there was nothing visibly wrong at all. Fiora's body was most likely experiencing some sort of technical problem that only Lenata would understand. Melia took Fiora's hand and thought fervently.
I wish I could do something.
She felt concern for her friend's well-being, as well as a sense of powerlessness. Then, a seething sense of anger, followed by unfocused frustration. Just then, Melia glimpsed a familiar figure outside the window. It was Shulk, who was supposed to be asleep in Dunban's room upstairs.
Where is he going at this hour of the night?
Melia sent her unfocused rage in Shulk's direction. Every night, she held Fiora's hand as she moaned in her sleep. Melia did this because there was nothing else she could do. But shouldn't Shulk have been doing it instead? Of course, it made no real difference if it was Melia's hand or Shulk's hand. A hand wasn't going to magically cure Fiora's physical problems. Melia was fully aware of this, but reluctant to accept it. Although they were in the safety of the town now, there was no telling when a Telethia might strike. Melia donned stellar defensive equipment and set out after Shulk. He was heading back to the research lab he had holed himself up in during the day. Shulk went straight to the lab. Once there, he began searching a bookshelf for something, unaware that Melia was watching him from the doorway. He appeared to be looking through very old paper documents. On closer inspection, the room was absolutely littered with similar texts. He was likely continuing the research he had begun during the day. Shulk's passion to achieve what needed to be done was always his strong suit. His sincerity had saved Melia before, in fact. The replica Mechonis he was now working on would undoubtedly save many lives too. Even so, Melia wanted to shout at him.
Saving countless others is a wonderful thing, but how can you blindly ignore the nightly suffering of a single person?
Shulk had no idea that Melia was in the lab with him, or that she harbored such anger. His thoughts were focused entirely on the biotic regeneration device. The biotic regeneration device was a piece of ancient high-entia technology Lenata had told him about. No one among the present-day high-entia knew how it worked, but it could supposedly free Fiora from her suffering. Not even the Mechon could recreate the device. But there was a chance one still existed somewhere out there, in working order. Trusting in Lenata's words, Shulk poured through the Sacrament research team's records. The team's members, including Shulk's parents, had investigated the ruins of ancient civilizations scattered across the Bionis. Shulk hoped that the device might have been mentioned somewhere in their findings. So, while working on the replica Monado mass production project, he continued to contend with piles of books and documents. Melia entered the room, oblivious to the thoughts going through Shulk's mind.
Shulk, what are you doing here?
Melia!
Unfortunately, Shulk was just about to move a heavy bundle from the top of the bookcase. Taken by surprise, he lost his balance and fell onto the floor, right on top of Melia. The weight of decades of research became literal, physical weight as tome after tome came crashing down on their heads.
Look out!
Shulk, hoping to shield Melia from the avalanche of text, covered Melia's body with his own. Then, it happened. Melia speaks to the verification device.
As successor to the Imperial line, I hereby order that control be yielded to me.
Dunban looks away. He doesn't want to be seen crying, it seems.
It appears we're in your debt once again.
Reyn answers with a laugh.
You can count on me. I'll protect Shulk until then. I promise.
Come. This is the right decision for you to make. Please enter the device.
Lenata urges. And then, Fiora smiles with a look of resolve.
What's wrong, Shulk?
Color returned to the world. At the center of it was Melia, on the verge of tears.
Melia! Where am I?
He saw his familiar lab, with documents scattered everywhere. After a moment, Shulk realized that his senses had returned from a short trip into the future.
Oh, I see. That was...
Melia trailed off. She finally realized that Shulk hadn't passed out while trying to protect her. Instead, his special ability had been activated.
Did you see the future?
Shulk nodded and began to explain what he had seen. Lenata had been talking about a bionic regeneration device, which was precisely what he was looking for now. In front of her stood Fiora. She was surrounded by the others, who all seemed happy. And then Melia used her identification to open a door that led to a room with the device.
In short, it was the thing you've been researching.
Yeah. There's supposedly a device somewhere on Bionis that can change Fiora back. And now I know where it is.
Then...
The color of realization spread across Melia's face, then transformed into joy.
Yes, and it's all thanks to you, Melia. The biotic regeneration device is here, in Colony 9. You're the one who showed it to me.
Melia launched herself onto Shulk's back.
That's wonderful, Shulk.
Melia's elation was followed by a tinge of regret. Shulk had been concerned for Fiora after all. She realized that she had been remiss to have ever doubted him. Shulk's party, now joined by Lenata, who had quickly arrived from Junks, now stood in the Magmel ruins.
This ornamentation. I've seen it in the Imperial capital before.
Melia was struck by a feeling of déjà vu, for what she saw bore a strong resemblance to an Imperial underground building.
These are no ordinary ruins. They're the innards of an ancient High Entia flying machine.
Lenata's words stunned Shulk and his companions. For the Colony 9 Self-Defense Force, these ruins had been a convenient source of ether cylinders, as well as a handy training spot full of monsters and defense systems. It turned out, however, that these ruins were actually the interior of a flying machine that likely crash-landed long, long ago.
They developed their own unique type of technology, different from the Mechonis. The biotic regeneration device is one such example. The fact this system is still in such good condition suggests the regeneration device might still be intact, too.
The party stood in a storage hangar, the same one from which Shulk and the others used to retrieve ether cylinders. At the back of it was a sealed door. Melia stepped toward it.
As successor to the Imperial line, I hereby order that control be yielded to me.
Long ago, this flying machine had belonged to the ancient High Entia. Its defense systems, after ages of faithfully protecting the vehicle as ordered by its former master, now acknowledged Melia as its new operator. And then, for the first time in centuries, maybe even a millennia, the sealed door opened. The party continued further inside, unhindered by the defense system. And then there it was, just as Shulk had seen in his vision of the future, the bionic regeneration device.
This is it. No question about it.
Shulk said. Lenata nodded in agreement. there sat a system of complicated-looking equipment centered around a transparent capsule large enough to fit a person. Dunban looked at the device and stuttered.
Then, this device can give Fiora her body back.
Yes, I believe so.
I see. It appears we're in your debt once again.
Shulk tried not to look as Dunban turned away. He knew from his vision of the future that Dunban didn't want to be seen weeping.
Can this really turn me back?
Fiora whispered with a dubious expression. Lenata laid a hand on her shoulder and replied,
Yes, it can. Although your body is a machine now, you still have parts of your biological form. This system will use its genetic data to reconstruct your original body.
Ricky not understand, but this make Fiora squishy, and then she give Ricky snuggles.
Fiora giggled.
Of course.
Although she smiled at Ricky, she also seemed faintly hesitant. Charlotte keenly picked up on this.
What's wrong? Is something the matter?
Well, it's, just how long will this regeneration take, Lenada?
Lenata fiddled with the control panel while she answered.
For your body, I believe half a year should do.
Half a year?
Fiora's face turned grim. Reyn swung his right arm around and smiled as he tried to cheer her up.
Half a year, huh? You can count on me. I'll protect Shulk until then. I promise.
Ha ha ha, come off it, Reyn. You know I don't need your protection. I'll be just fine.
Come. This is the right decision for you to make. Please enter the device.
Lenata said, opening the capsule from the control panel.
Take a nap in here, and in half a year your body will be as good as new.
But Fiora held her right hand to her chest and smiled with a look of resolve.
No, I'd rather not.
From atop the hill leading to Tariff Cave, Shulk and Fiora looked down at Colony 9.
Are you really sure about this, Fiora?
Stop asking the same question over and over. Oh, Shulk, you're always that way.
Fiora replied. Unlike Shulk, Fiora now felt completely free from her worries, because she had made the firm decision that she wouldn't go into the regeneration device, for now at least. If Fiora were to regenerate her body now, she would have to sleep for half a year. The god probably wouldn't wait that long. The Telethia were set to eradicate all life on the Bionis. Shulk and his friends needed to slay the god, slay Zanza, before that could happen. But if Fiora went into the regeneration device, she wouldn't be able to help them fight.
I've made up my mind. I'm going to fight alongside you with this body. I can always change back later. It's like I said before. I'd rather fight by your side than stay behind and worry.
Lenata felt conflicted. There was no telling how long the coming battle would last, and there was no guarantee that Fiora's body would last that long without her Monado. But explaining this wouldn't have changed Fiora's mind in the least. In which case, there was only one thing Lenata could do as a doctor.
Very well. If that's what you want, then I'll make sure your current body keeps going for as long as possible. I'll even give it every extra minute and second I can.
Reyn and Dunban stood side by side, looking down at the street below them.
Let's come back here for sure, Dunban.
Indeed. And once the battle is over, we can get Fiora her old body back and all live here, together.
Shulk nodded at their words.
Yes, because this is our home.
And so, Shulk and his companions set out for the cave on their way to Gower Plain. Behind them, standing as it always had, was Colony 9, their one and only home.